Eddie, a 30-year-old man, inhabited a unique universe where silhouettes merged in harmony with melodies. His birth came with an early sentence, congenital glaucoma, which deprived his eyes of the chance to delight in the golden sun, the multicolored beauty of a rainbow, or the mesmerizing twinkle of the stars. However, what destiny stole from him in vision, it returned with interest in the form of dreams, tangible forms only discernible by his hands, and sounds whose complexity he could explore and understand in ways that few could. In his darkness, Eddie was not alone. His mother, Eleanor, and his older sister, Scarlett, acted as beacons of an invisible light, guiding him through the shadows of his unique world. Their voices and constant presence provided unwavering points of reference that helped Eddie navigate through his perpetual night. Eleanor had always been a strong and determined woman, but towards Eddie, she nurtured a unique tenderness. From the moment her son's diagnosis was confirmed, she took on the role of his eyes, painting in his mind with a rich palette of words vivid images of the world he could not see. She was a renowned storyteller whose competence and dedication to her profession ensured the family of financial stability that many could only wish for. But for Eleanor, nothing was more important than ensuring Eddie experienced life in all its nuances and contrasts, even if through her accounts and descriptions. She dedicated herself to transforming his darkness into light, his blindness into vision, and his limited world into a universe of infinite possibilities. Tragedy befell the family when Eddie's father, Manuel, a free-spirited adventurer, suffered a fatal accident during one of his frequent bike excursions. The sudden disappearance of his father left a profound mark on the family, but it intensified Eleanor's love and care for Eddie. She devoted herself to Eddie in countless ways. Her love was a constant song that danced in her heart, a daily reminder that even in the darkness, there was light. Eddie, Eleanor used to say with a gentle and affectionate voice, though you may not see the world with your eyes, you can feel it with your heart. You can hear the whisper of trees, the bird song, Scarlett's laughter. These are the truly important things. Those words engraved in his mind like a mantra guided Eddie as he navigated his dark world. They were the compass that directed him, the certainty that although he couldn't see the world, he could live it in ways that no one else could. On a particularly sunny afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, Eddie walked down a street lined with Victorian houses and magnolia trees. Cool shadows danced on his skin as he carefully explored the familiar paths ahead with his cane. Suddenly, the tranquility was shattered by hurried steps and the sound of panting breath. Before he could process what was happening, a body collided with his, and arms wrapped around his neck. A feminine voice, veiled by breathlessness, quickly spoke into his ear, "Pretend you know me, please." Eddie was stunned, but held on to the stranger as she nestled into his arms. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart and the warmth of her body against his. Her voice, despite being breathless, had a musical quality that intrigued him. He decided to play along. "I thought you'd never make it, my love," he said, throwing his arm around her shoulders. Laurie, the stranger in his arms, let out a nervous laugh. "I'm sorry, I was stuck in traffic," she quickly improvised. The pursuer's footsteps were getting closer, and she held on to Eddie tighter, who, despite the strange situation, found her presence comforting. The danger passed, the footsteps faded away, and her breathing returned to normal. As she untangled herself from him, thanking him for his help, Eddie found himself enchanted by the mysterious woman whose voice held a touch of hope even in the face of danger. Several days later, Eddie was alone, sitting on a bench in the local park, his phone firmly gripped in his hand as he listened to an audiobook. The air was filled with the sound of birds singing and children playing in the distance. He was completely absorbed, the world around him fading into insignificance. That's when he felt a sinister presence approaching, the sound of cautious footsteps, a shadow blocking the warmth of the sun, and then a quick and agile hand attempting to snatch his phone. "That's mine," a deep voice protested. Before Eddie could defend himself, a familiar voice cut through the air. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Laurie warned, her tone gentle yet unquestionably firm. Eddie could feel the tension in the air. There was a pause, a sigh of hesitation, and then the hand closing around his phone retreated. Eddie heard the sound of hurried footsteps fading away. "He's gone," Laurie informed, the amusement evident in her voice. Are you some kind of guardian angel? Eddie joked, feeling a smile spread across his face. Laurie laughed, a light and pleasant sound that made Eddie want to get to know her better. I guess I'm just good at scaring people, she playfully replied. Eddie reached out and found Laurie's arm, expressing his gratitude with a gentle squeeze. He didn't understand why the thief feared Laurie, but he knew that somehow she had saved him once again, and for that, he was grateful. As Eddie expressed his gratitude to Laurie, the words of thanks still lingering on his lips, a familiar yet tense voice interrupted the scene. Eddie, come over here right now. Eddie was surprised to recognize his mother Eleanor's voice. He could sense Laurie's shock beside him, and he heard her breath catch slightly. Eleanor approached, concern etched in her words like a harsh line. She grabbed Eddie by the arm, pulling him away from Laurie. You have no idea who you're talking to, Eddie, she said, her voice laden with tension. Laurie, on the other hand, seemed to become defensive. I was just trying to help, ma'am, she said, her voice carrying a touch of indifference. But Eddie could sense the surprise and confusion in her. Eleanor didn't seem impressed. I know exactly what kind of help you provide, young lady, she retorted, anger in her words making Eddie flinch a little. His mother rarely got angry, but when she did, it was best not to get in her way. The truth was that Eleanor wasn't wrong in her judgment. Laurie, the woman Eddie found intriguing and kind, was actually one of the leaders of one of the most dangerous gangs in the region. Now, Eddie was being dragged away from her, filled with confusion and a newfound sense of fear. On a beautiful day, as Laurie walked through the bustling streets of Savannah, she saw Eddie sitting alone in his favorite spot in the town square, a bench shaded by a sturdy oak tree. She hesitated for a moment, observing him from a distance before approaching. Eddie, she greeted, sitting down beside him. The tree's shadow provided a pleasant relief from the summer sun's heat, and the soft murmur of conversations around provided a comforting backdrop to their conversation. Laurie was known for her reserved nature, always keeping her thoughts and feelings behind a mask of indifference. But that day, something about her seemed different. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a sadness in her voice that Eddie had never noticed before. Eddie, I need to tell you something, she began, looking at their intertwined hands in her lap. You know, I never wanted this for myself, she confessed, her voice low, almost a whisper. This, what? Eddie asked, his curiosity piqued. This life, Laurie sighed heavily. This life of violence and fear. I always dreamed of being a fashion designer. I wanted to create clothes, to paint the world with fabric and colors. Eddie fell silent, taken aback by the confession. He knew Laurie was tough, that she had lived a life that forced her to toughen up, but he never imagined that beneath her armor was such a vibrant and delicate dream. But then why? Eddie asked, his voice reflecting both surprise and genuine curiosity about the woman sitting beside him. Laurie looked at her hands, seeking courage in the lines of her palm. Taking a deep breath, the air feeling heavier around her, she carefully formulated her words. My mother, she began, a tone of sadness tinting her voice. She fell seriously ill when I was younger. The treatment she needed was exorbitant, an amount we could never manage. I was desperate, Eddie, her voice faltered a bit, revealing a crack in her usually unshakable armor. So, I joined the gang. It was the only way I could think of to get the money we needed. I didn't have many opportunities, you know. Life hasn't been kind to us. The square seemed to hold its breath as Eddie absorbed her words. A silence fell between them, filling the space with tangible weight. Then, with the kindness and empathy that only someone who has faced adversity can offer, Eddie spoke. Laurie, no matter how distant your dreams may seem, never stop believing in them, he said, his voice laden with sincerity. I am not a judge. I am not here to question your choices. I can feel in my heart that you are a good person, someone who was forced to toughen up to weather the storm. Eddie's words hit Laurie like a ray of light piercing through a curtain of dark clouds. She felt seen, understood in a way that hadn't happened in a long time. He didn't see her as a gang leader, a lawbreaker, but as a woman, a daughter, someone who fought with all her might to protect those she loved. That afternoon, in the shade of the oak tree and to the gentle sounds of the world around them, they shared an ice cream, no longer as strangers but as two souls who found understanding and acceptance in each other amidst the turmoil of a world that can often be cruel and indifferent. Eddie was in the middle of a sentence when the sound of heels hitting the concrete of the square caught his attention. He recognized the rhythm, the urgency, the purpose. It was his mother, Eleanor. "I won't allow this." Eleanor's voice, usually so calm and composed, now resonated through the open space with a fierceness that made Eddie flinch. "Laurie, you can say goodbye now," she said, her voice laced with cold finality. "This will be the last time you see my son." Eddie turned towards his mother's voice, shock and confusion in his voice. "Mom, what are you saying?" Eleanor softened her voice for Eddie, but the steel in her tone didn't diminish. "I've secured a spot for you in a treatment program in Europe, Eddie. They believe they can help restore your vision." The surprise was so intense that Eddie felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "I'm going to Europe?" he asked, seeking any kind of guidance in his mother's voice. Eleanor nodded, even though she knew Eddie couldn't see. "And I've also arranged for an exchange program. You'll be able to study there once you're done with your treatment. Choose any course you want, as long as it's far away from here." Eddie was almost speechless. "For how long?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Her silence spoke more than any response could. "As far as I'm concerned, you'll stay there," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. It was clear to Laurie that Eleanor was doing this to keep Eddie away from her, that the plan was to send him far enough that he wouldn't be able to come back to her. She felt a pang of bitterness, but she didn't say anything. Laurie knew the decision was not in her hands, and all she could do was say goodbye. With the mix of anxiety and excitement, Eddie embarked on a journey that would change his life forever. With Eleanor by his side, they arrived in the city of canals, Amsterdam. Even before his treatment, Eddie always prided himself on his independence, but in a new city and about to face surgery that could completely change his perception of the world, he was more than grateful for his mother's constant and reassuring presence. The treatment and surgery were a success. Slowly, the darkness that surrounded him began to lighten, replaced by shadows and shapes he had never experienced before. With each passing day, with each sunrise, he could now see. Eddie felt more alive than ever. As soon as Eddie recovered, a new adventure awaited him. He set off for France, a country famous for its rich tradition in fashion and design. Laurie's story, the woman who saved him and showed him the harsh reality of a forgotten life, deeply inspired him. Influenced by Laurie's unspoken passion for fashion, he chose to study tailoring, a way to honor her courage and dreams. Every day at school was an adventure for Eddie. He was in love with every detail of the craft, the texture of each fabric, the sound of scissors cutting through materials, and the steady rhythm of his needle penetrating the material. Every time he sat before a pristine fabric, needle and thread in hand, he closed his eyes and saw Laurie. He saw her strength, her determination, and dreams yet to be fulfilled. "Laurie," he whispered to himself, "this is for you, for your dreams." Her image fueled the passion within him. Every stitch he made, every pattern he created, was a tribute to that extraordinary woman who had inspired him to believe in himself and pursue his dreams. She was the unseen muse that gave him purpose, the motivation that kept him going even when things got tough. In fact, Eddie wasn't just selling clothes, he was sowing dreams, the dream of a brave woman and his own renewed dream. 5 years after embarking on that transformative journey, Eddie found himself back on American soil. During his studies, he had accumulated valuable experience working in renowned Parisian ateliers, learning from master craftsmen, honing his skills, and refining his talent. However, despite the charm and glamour of the fashion capital, a void persisted in his heart. He missed his homeland, the familiar flavors and sounds of the United States. And so, with a suitcase full of dreams and a heart full of hope, he decided to return. Eddie knew he had the knowledge and talent to open doors in his native country. After all, he was now a professional trained in Paris, the birthplace of haute couture. However, he chose not to return to Savannah, the city where he grew up. Instead, he chose to establish himself in Atlanta, a rapidly growing city full of opportunities. "I believe Atlanta is the right place for me," Eddie said to his mother in a phone call with contagious enthusiasm in his voice. "There's a creative vibe in this city that you don't find in many places. I think I can really make a difference here." Eleanor, on the other end of the line, felt a mix of emotions, joy that her son was coming back closer, but also a certain sadness. Atlanta wasn't Savannah, there would still be miles separating them. However, she knew Eddie and believed in him. She knew of the immense talent he possessed and the unwavering determination that had always characterized him. "I know, Eddie," she said, striving to keep her voice steady. "I always knew you would go far. You have a gift, and I'm sure Atlanta is the right place for you." Eddie smiled, even though his mother couldn't see it. There was an immeasurable comfort in her voice, a confidence that could only come from someone who had known him since day one. It was true, over the years, he had always shown resilience, striving to achieve what he set out to do, and it wouldn't be any different this time. Besides, Eleanor continued, her gentle voice bringing a tone of optimism, "It's not like there's an entire ocean separating us now. It's just a few hours away, and no matter how many miles there are between us, you will always be my boy, and I'll be here for you." Hearing her say those words was a balm for Eddie. He knew his mother would always be there, regardless of the distance or circumstances. It was a comforting reminder that no matter how far he went, he would always have a home to return to. Freshly arrived in Atlanta, Eddie spent most of his time navigating the city's diverse fashion ateliers, sending out resumes, and eagerly waiting for an opportunity. One finally came from a newly opened atelier called Stitch in Color. They scheduled an interview, and Eddie felt a mix of anxiety and excitement, typical of a new beginning. As he entered the atelier for his interview, a strange sense of familiarity washed over him. The place had a cozy charm, and a woman was sitting behind an elegant desk. The woman turned to greet him, and that's when he recognized her, the way her lips moved, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. It was unmistakable. But it was the voice, that voice he could recognize amidst a noisy crowd, that confirmed his suspicions. "Laurie?" Eddie asked, incredulous. Before him, Laurie seemed equally shocked. She stood up abruptly, gasping with surprise. "Eddie, but your vision." Eddie smiled, feeling strangely at home. "It's a long story, and it seems I'm not the only one who has changed." Laurie laughed, her expression relieved. "You have no idea, Eddie. You were my inspiration to leave that dark world and believe in my dreams again." And in that newly opened atelier, two old friends reunited, their lives intertwined in ways they could have never predicted, but that somehow felt perfectly right. The interview room suddenly felt too small for Eddie. There was Laurie, a figure from his past, an unmistakable and familiar voice even after all these years. The surprise and shock on her face mirrored the emotion she herself was feeling. "Eddie," Laurie began, her voice trembling with the intensity of the moment, I can see you." "Laurie," Eddie said, his bright blue eyes filling with tears as he drank in the sight of her. He saw her like he had never seen before, not just through shapes and sounds, but in full color. The emotion on her face was almost overwhelming. In response, Laurie quickly stood up from her chair, circled the table, and enveloped Eddie in a tight embrace. The initial shock turned into relief and happiness. "I can't believe it, Eddie. You're here, and you can see me," she said, her face buried in his shoulder. Eddie returned the embrace, feeling the reality of the situation settle in. "I'm okay, Laurie, and I'm a tailor now," he said, a wide smile on his face. "I told you it was possible to dream, didn't I?" Laurie pulled back, a wet laugh escaping her. "Yes, you did, and here we are, both living our dreams." They looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Both having faced adversity to reach where they were now, silence filled the room as Laurie began to speak, each word uttered with the weight of gratitude. "You don't know, Eddie, but it was your belief in me that made me believe I could be more than just a gang leader. When you told me to pursue my dreams, it really struck a chord. I got a job as a saleswoman in a clothing store shortly after. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the first step to changing my life. She smiled, reminiscing about that time, and that's what I did. With my talent and dedication, I managed to grow in the industry. Look at me today, I'm a fashion designer, just as I dreamed. Eddie was moved, but also filled with pride. And I, in turn, was inspired by you, Laurie. When my surgery was successful, and I went on the exchange program, I thought, what do I really want to do? And the answer was in your story. The passion you had for fashion design was contagious, so I decided to study tailoring. They both looked at each other, their intertwined story hanging in the air between them. They had found inspiration in each other, and it had led to a profound change in their lives. This moment was the celebration of their dreams coming true and of a friendship that remained strong despite distance and time. The journey Eddie and Laurie had embarked on unfolded before them, filling the atelier with promises of a future full of possibilities. They stood side by side at their work tables, the soft fabrics and vibrant colors surrounding them, a silent testament to their shared aspirations. With determination etched on their faces, they committed to growing not just as fashion professionals, but as human beings. We can do this, Laurie, Eddie said, his resolute voice echoing through the room. Let's strive to be better every day, for ourselves, for each other, and for the world. Laurie looked at him, a loving smile adorning her lips. Yes, let's, Eddie. And in a final twist, their relationship evolved beyond friendship and professional companionship. On an ordinary day, in the tranquility of the atelier, they embarked on a romance, proving that the flames of love can ignite in the most unexpected hearts. Now, they were building a future together, grounded in love and the promise of growth. It not only served as a reminder that change is possible, but also that it's never too late to start anew. Their stories, once tainted with hardships and despair, were now filled with hope and realized dreams. A perfect ending to their personal journeys and a promising premise for the future they decided to build together. In this new phase of their lives, Eddie and Laurie embarked on an adventure filled with challenges but also countless joys. No matter the adversities, each day was a new chance for improvement, for growth, for reinvention, and building a better world. The culmination of their story found Laurie, now a respected fashion designer, and Eddie, a skillful and prosperous tailor, presenting a charitable fashion show to raise funds for ocular diseases treatment. It was a remarkable feat that reflected the love and tireless determination they nurtured. Eddie looked towards the audience, identifying among the sea of faces his mother Eleanor and his sister Scarlett, sporting proud smiles. Initially, Eleanor struggled to accept the relationship between Laurie and Eddie. After all, the memory of the former Laurie was still alive in her mind. But over time, she was able to see Laurie's true transformation, trusting in her kindness and accepting their union. In the crowd, Eddie also spotted former members of Laurie's gang who, inspired by their former leader, had chosen new paths, abandoning the cycle of violence and crime. A look of understanding was exchanged between Eddie and Laurie, a gleam of fulfillment shimmering in their eyes. They had achieved a significant change in their lives and, more importantly, had positively impacted the existence of many others. Their smiles displayed contentment for knowing that there was still much to be done, but being satisfied with the path they had traveled. They were where they desired to be, side by side with a clear and optimistic view of a promising future. With that, Eddie and Laurie's narrative reached its conclusion, but their journey undoubtedly was only just beginning. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.